No.
Madam Secretary, please note for the record that all council members are in attendance with the exception of Ms. Solis. And with that, we still have a quorum, and I will now open the meeting. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As always, we want to welcome all the citizens who came here tonight to participate or observe our meeting. You're always welcome, and you're welcome at the appropriate time to step forward and make any comments. With that, we have some announcements.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We have a few staff updates for you today really briefly. I want to introduce you to one of our newest employees. And so right over to the left, you might see, some of you may recognize Shane Blucker. He is our new multimedia specialist for our communications department. At the last meeting, I incorrectly introduced George Partida as our new multimedia specialist, but George is actually our multimedia manager. And so, George, sorry about that last time. But in any case, Shane, welcome to the team. Appreciate it. I also want to mention that we have a couple of staffers that recently received some recognitions. April Hilbrick, she recently became a certified municipal clerk, which is a designation granted by the International Institute of Municipal Clerks. And so, April, congratulations. Our municipal court administrator, Tiffany Toda, she was recently selected as the president of the South Chapter of the Texas Court Clerks Association. The state typically is split up into 15 regions, and so she's now the president of our chapter. And so we thank her for her service in representing our community with her association. So thank you, Tiffany. And that's all I got.
Okay, and I think, Ms. Hilbert, do we have some awards or announcements this evening?
I do not believe that Mr. Armstrong.
Okay,
And we could always come back to that part of the agenda
All
if
right.
necessary.
we'll do so if he arrives. Okay, now we have items from council. Are there any items from council?
Yes, I'd like to propose that the next meeting that we put on the agenda, a discussion of lowering the speed limit in residential neighborhoods from 30 to 25.
Will do. Thank you.
Any other items from council? Hearing none, I'll go on to citizens' communication. If anyone is here tonight that would like to speak to council on any matter, please step forward now.
Hello, I'm Jenny
Hello.
Stafford, CEO of Midcoast Family Services. I was thinking on the way over here, one of these days I'm going to come and talk about something about, rather than homelessness, we have lots of other things going on, but tonight is not the night that's going to happen. I want to talk to you just a little bit about the recent count, what we refer to as the point in time, or we used to call the homeless count. That's one night out of every year that we set aside under HUD's direction to try to do a census of people who are literally homeless, either living on the street, in a vehicle, in an abandoned building, someplace not meant for human habitation, or in a publicly funded shelter. That happened on January the 23rd of this year. And I don't know if you saw the piece on CBS News, but we actually made the national news last Friday night. I got a call early in the week of the homeless count asking if they, wanting to talk to me. And of course, I didn't even respond because I didn't figure it was actually CBS News. And then they called back and said a reporter would be there the next day. And then I realized they were coming to Victoria to do that. But they had done a piece on homelessness in Seattle and a piece on homelessness in Los Angeles, and they wanted to see what it looked like in a small community. So they called the Texas Homeless Network asking for their guidance on where to send them, and they sent them to us. They sent them to Victoria. And it's not because our problem is so big or that our solution is so great, but that we've been doing this a while. And, you know, hats off to the city of Victoria for taking the lead on that. For those of you who remember Jared Mayfield back in the early 2000s, he was running city planning back then. And they had a great team that got us started in the right direction with the Homeless Coalition and just the right infrastructure, even though it's very informal, got us started on the right foot. So CBS showed up the day of the homeless count. There was the executive producer, reporter, and 2 or 3 camera guys, and they had microphones and all kinds of equipment. I had cameras on my car. I felt like I was on, Rescue 911 or something at some point, peeling around the corner. But the day didn't go exactly like we had planned. The day of the count, we go to places that we know homeless people, or people are in general, like the library, VCAM, Victoria Christian Assistance Ministry. We go to Christ Kitchen. Our staff also visit all of the street corners and the encampments that we know that people typically are. That's been our protocol for years, and it's worked for years. This year didn't work so great. For one thing, the day before, we had a terrible rainstorm. On that Wednesday, it was one of our big ones, and a lot of the encampments where people had been down in gullies and in low areas had gotten washed out. And so the people that we usually can find weren't there. So there was strike one. And then strike two, as you can imagine, I walked into a place where there were several people, and as soon as they saw the camera, they scattered because nobody wanted to have their picture taken. So the day of the count was less than successful, but yet it is what it is. And the way that we do that is we have an app on the phone or an iPad or whatever, and you enter the information. You do the best you can asking questions, some basic demographic information, because we try to deduplicate to make sure we're not counting people twice. But we can also do an observation. If you see somebody who is not willing or combative or just you aren't comfortable asking them, so it's called an observation. In our shelters, we have to do surveys. They prefer that we do surveys with all people, but we can also do an observation. So there's 3 different categories. So I've got some information I'm going to leave with you in a minute, and this is the report that was just released last week by Texas Homeless Network about our count. And this is the count that will go to HUD. But in big letters at the top, it says this does not capture all the information because it is a flawed system, as you can imagine. I wanted to bring to you tonight what they found was that we had 140 homeless people. Of the 140, 59 were living in shelters, and that is either Salvation Army, Perpetual Help Home, Midcoast Family Services Women's Crisis Center, or Midcoast Family Services Transitional Housing. Out of the 140, 81 are literally homeless and living on the street. That number was way wrong. What we found in our own information, our own data collection, was that there are 237 people living on the street. And we know that because they're all enrolled in our services. We've enrolled them in a couple of different ways. The most primary way is our day center. We operate a day center every afternoon, Monday through Friday, where they can come, where anybody can come in and shower. They can talk to a case manager. They can pick up some food items. We always try to have change of clothes. But main thing is just to kind of get out of the weather. And so that has been in use since February of 28 of last year, 2019. So we've just finished our first year. And during that first year, we provided 3,400 services. And what that means generally is that's showers. That's the number one requested service, is just a shower. We've been able to house about 20 people. One of the ones that was one of the most heartbreaking was a family living in their car. And so we opened up the day center at an off time so that family could come in with their 2 or 3 small children. But we were able to house them. So that's really our goal with that day center, is to provide housing. The question is where? We've got a couple of different options that work for people who are impoverished or having trouble making ends meet. The first one is our permanent supportive housing program. And just as a reminder, we rent 42 apartments and our homes for persons who are identified as chronically homeless. And permanent supportive housing means that they stay there because they are not able to take care of themselves. They will never be able to pay their own way without some assistance. Most of them get Social Security disability, and we're able to help them manage that money. And we charge them rent, which is generally 10% of their income. So just to translate that into numbers, most disability checks are $750-ish a month. And we take $75 for rent, which in turn we turn around and invest in usually electricity for that apartment. So we can place them in permanent supportive housing, except we maybe have 1 or 2 openings a year at the most. We can place them into rapid rehousing. We have funding from Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs to use funds to help them get into an apartment. However, think about how hard it's going to be for them to qualify for an apartment, with most of them with very low or maybe no income. If you're making $750 a month, you're not going to qualify for much. But they're also eligible for Promise Point. They are the other alternative. And then public housing, which generally remains pretty full for single individuals. So the good news is we applied for and just learned recently that we are going to receive funding for another 14 units. So we will add 14 to our 42 units, and that we are still pending. We've applied for an additional 14 that's coming from a different pot of money. So we are slowly chipping away at that number, but we still have some way to go.
Jenny, if I may, would you mind if you could leave us this information? And I would really like to have you come back and I could put it on an item from council.
You bet.
Because technically, we can't converse with you under citizens communication. But
Okay.
I'd like to get it on the agenda where we can have a discussion
Would love
of this.
that.
Would you mind doing that?
Not at all. I would
And
love
then
that.
that way, we can all participate with you and learn more about it and actually be able to give more information to the citizens. If you don't mind, would you do that?
I'd be glad to do that.
Okay,
All right.
because we're kind of out of our 5 minutes.
I wondered about that. Where did the
Well,
clock go?
I don't have the
Yeah.
clock on my deal anymore, but we've
Yeah,
got
yeah,
it. But I
yeah.
would rather do it in a way, this is very important. And I would rather have it presented in a way that we can actually converse with you, if you don't mind.
You tell me when and where, and I'll be
Okay,
there.
we'll do that, and thank you so very much.
You're very welcome. Can I
Okay?
leave this for you to?
Yeah,
Maybe
please
this will
do.
help in the meantime.
Please do. I don't want to cut you off, but I think we should have a more robust discussion about it.
Well, I appreciate
Because
that.
it's very
And I was
important.
just going to end like I usually do with my hand out, saying that we need help with our match money.
Okay.
That we currently have about our match currently is 50,000, and it's going to go up another 21,000. So we're going to be struggling to make our ends meet.
Well,
So
we'll get you on the agenda where we
Perfect.
can interact with you, because it is a very important subject for our community.
all right, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Is there any other comments from the citizens? Seeing none, we'll move into the consent agenda.
There are 3 items on the consent agenda tonight that will be approved by a single vote. They are first, the adoption of the minutes of February 18th, 2020 council meeting. Second, to grant a variance to section 21-83 for property located at 602 North Main Street and 104 East Staten Avenue. And third is approving a grant application to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality in the amount of $281,250 for air quality monitoring.
I move to approve the items on the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept items on the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Item E1 is to approve an application for the 2019 Assistance to Firefighters Grant in the amount of $434,000 for replacement of self-contained breathing apparatus.
I move to approve item E1.
A second.
You have a presentation?
Real quick, Thomas, we can do E2 as well. It's kind of all on the same presentation.
Sure.
Or if you need to do them separate, that's fine, and then I can do the presentation.
Technically, under Robert's rules, we should have one item at a time, but if there's no objection from council, we can go ahead and get a motion and a second on the second and then approve them both simultaneously. Item E2 is to approve application for the 2019 Assistance to Firefighters Grant in the amount of $85,800 for annual firefighter physicals and cancer screening.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and second for both items. We'll go ahead and give you a
Sure.
presentation.
Mayor, members of council, good evening. Mr. Garza, good evening. Just real quick, one slide presentation. We just wanted to take this opportunity to highlight our grants and how important they are to our organization. Over the past few years, we received, $130,000 from, I'd call them local grants, either the governor's office or our very generous Victoria 100 Club. But this new AFG grant is something new that we haven't done in the past few years. And as Thomas said, we are applying for SCBA in the amount of $434,000, and that has a match of $43,000. If we were to go out and buy that as a city on our own, that would cost us anywhere from $550,000 to $600,000. So that the grant and the way that's set up is a tremendous value to the city. And our air packs, we purchased those about 10 to 11 years ago, and they're really getting to that phase where we need to replace those, and we're putting those on our forefront of our budget planning. The other grant item that we are applying for through Assistance to Firefighter Grant is our firefighter physicals and cancer screening. And this is truly a straight value to the city of approximately $86,000 with a $8,000 match. So we just wanted to update the city on our approach and our need and importance for grants and how they truly impact our budget. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any at this time.
Chief, can you talk a little bit about maybe even some of the challenges that you and your department face as it relates to grant management?
Absolutely, absolutely. So just for these two grants alone through the AFG process, it's taken 3 of our staff working to get all the information, all the data, just to build the application to submit to Assistance to Firefighters Grant. And that doesn't even include, if we're fortunate to be awarded, the management of that grant. These grants, because they're so large, take a significant amount of management, reporting, making sure you're tracking data. So it's an extensive workload, but as you can see, very well worth it.
Well, thank you to all those people that did all that
Absolutely.
extra work.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other questions for the chief? Any other discussion from council? Hearing none, I'll call for the simultaneous votes on item E1 and E2. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Thank you.
Thank you, chief.
Item E3 is to approve a grant application to the COPS hiring program in the amount of $787,288 to fund 4 additional police officer positions over the next 3 years.
Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. Before you tonight is a request to apply for and participate. I'm sorry if I jumped in front of you all, but to participate in the COPS hiring program, which is a U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Community-Oriented Public Safety. And just to I have one slide and then a couple other comments, but this is a competitive program for law enforcement agencies used to hire entry-level officers, and they also provide funding to hire back officers that have been laid off in certain jurisdictions. The goal, obviously, is to increase community policing, support crime prevention efforts, and to impact violent crime in our particular instance. This program provides for 75% of the salary and benefits up to $125,000 per officer over the course of 3 years. We're requesting 4 officers at a current salary of $62,274. So the total is $747,288. The grant will cover up to and included $500,000 of that, and the city's portion would be $247,000. So there are obviously some city participation in this, and it ends up being about $20,000 per officer per year. And then after the end of the grant cycle, the city assumes $249,000 on ongoing cost with the officers that have been hired throughout this program. We have participated in this program in the past, which has helped the department grow its ranks slowly and steadily with support from the grant funds. You know, and in getting into, I'll probably repeat a little bit of something what the Chief Fox said, but one of the things that we always attempt to seek out grant funding opportunities. Anytime we can help out, lessen the impact to the general fund, we certainly pursue those opportunities whenever possible. And just to give you guys a sense of our grant acquisitions, we generally receive about, and this has been held true in the last couple of years, anywhere between $250,000 and $300,000 a year in grants, whether that be a STEP grant, which is our traffic safety grant, or our task force grants and some of the equipment grants, We also have been fortunate enough to receive 2 motorcycles grants from our 100 Club. So we very much pursue those opportunities when they present themselves. I will say that dealing with grants is very time-consuming. It's a very specialized, shall we say, specialized skill set that sometimes perhaps, maybe not fire, but sometimes perhaps maybe exceeds that public safety expertise, although we try very hard to stay on top of it. But I can tell you that in this day and age, cities and counties definitely have, pursued having somebody with that specific expertise. And so we continue to move in that direction, but it is something that requires an awful lot of time and attention and preparation in not only applying for the grant, but monitoring it and the reporting that goes along with it. So in closing, what I'm proposing is City Council review and consideration and hopefully approval of our participation and application into the COPS hiring program. And I'm prepared to answer any questions should you have any.
Is the
Talk
money?
a little bit about the timeline.
Timeline on this is we have to have our application submitted by March 11th. And so we're prepared to do that. We have our grant writer in this particular grant that's prepared to submit that once we get approval from council.
Is the money received in a lump sum or over the 3-year period?
It's going to be over the 3-year
Spread out.
period. Yes,
So
spread out.
our match is over a 3-year
Yes.
period, okay.
And we should be notified in the summer whether or not, if approved, if our application was approved. We would know in the
Right,
summer.
so we
this
should know in time before we adopt the budget if we need to account for this. And I can tell you, having gone through this program in Kingsville too, is that even though the program covers 75% for 3 years and then kind of just falls off, the smart thing to do on the back end is to budget 25%, 50%, 75%, and then by the time you hit year 4, you're at the 100%. And so there are ways to kind of budget it on the back end to where that hit isn't as significant as the grant might make it sound.
I move to accept item E3.
Second. We have a motion and second to accept item E3. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, I have a question for the chief. How are we on that hiring plan we did a number of years ago? And since there's a couple of, Mr. Lofgren's probably heard about the hiring plan being out there, I want to make sure that everybody understands. I don't know if you've heard it, Mayor.
Yeah, we've met that goal. I believe it was 2012, maybe 2013. Council committed to growing the organization by 10 full-time equivalent police officer positions over a period of 5 years, and we've accomplished that. We're now at a budgeted strength of 226.
We need to get another analysis done within the next year or two on that force, or do you have did that report that we have done give us enough information to internally look at it to make sure we're staffed correctly?
It did. We took another look at it using the numbers and most of the formula that the ICMA had provided to us. So we were able, I believe it was the end of last year or beginning of the year before. It's still tracking, pretty consistent with what that original report back in 2013 had indicated. But we certainly could at some point in time go back and see if everything still holds true. And if you remember, for the sake of people that weren't on council at the time, that was a pretty significant workload analysis that the ICMA came in and performed for us over a period of several weeks to come up with that conclusion in terms of what is the current level of staffing and what is the future expected level of staffing should be.
Right.
So that's data that advises officers per capita in a community, or how's it?
Well, that's actually one formula that they use is per capita, but this one specifically dealt with taking a look at workload metrics and applying a certain formula that says, for example, how much uncommitted patrol time do you want to have? And that means how much time not going from call to call to call do you want your officers to have so they can be out proactively solving community problems? And so how you deal with those formulas is what they ended up doing, is that they came back with a full chart in terms of a statistical analysis of where Victoria Police Department should be considering the current and future workload.
Any further questions? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of item E3, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We'll now move into city manager reports.
All right, if y'all don't mind, I want to actually take these out of order a little bit. And so I want to touch on providing an update on the coronavirus first. And we do have David Gonzalez, who's the director of the health department, who's here. And so he's going to spearhead this update. We also have our emergency management coordinator, Rick McBriar, and our fire chief, Chief Fox, here as well to support him and help answer any questions that you might have. So, David?
Good. Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, council and staff. Just asked to present a current update. We'll just give some very kind of general situational report and then be happy to answer any questions, then kind of defer to Rick and Chief Fox for some further statements from them. Just so you know, currently we're monitoring national situation. It's evolving on a day-to-day basis. Currently, we're looking at about 100 cases in the U.S. right now. The CDC is dividing that up into two categories. One is going to be essentially cases that originated somewhat in the U.S., and there's about 60 of those. And then they have about 45 that came over on from the cruise ship that they repatriated here to the U.S. So we're looking at about 100 cases. That does change on a daily basis, so those numbers will change in the coming days. Right now, we're looking, I believe there's been 6 deaths nationwide. 4 of those were in a nursing home, and I believe all of them have had underlying conditions. So we're looking, those here locally or in the U.S. have been attributed somewhat to those cases of underlying conditions. If you may have heard that there was one case in Texas that tested positive after their release from federal quarantine, and those are those were the cases that were under CDC monitoring there at Lackland. So you may have heard that in the media. CDC is heading that effort up to do the contact tracing there with that individual. And they are currently heading up a situation in coordination also with San Antonio Metro Health Department and DSHS Region 8 and the Department of State Health Services as well. You also may have heard the San Antonio mayor declared a public health emergency there. From what I've learned, most of that is due to the resource, needs there locally and within the region that due to the investigations and the support there for Lackland, as well as the exposure there they had locally. So that's where the primary need for that declaration came from. Right now, just so you know, with the Victoria County Public Health Department, we're referring to CDC for guidance as well as Department of State Health Services on guidance for the situation. We are coordinating both with all with the Office of Emergency Management, Victoria Fire Department, EMS, school districts, hospitals, higher education, through to kind of head this up for a coordinated effort there. We will continue to share information as it comes available. We share it both through our primarily through our Facebook at the health department, our website, and then we also push it out and share with the city and county also to push out to their social media and other media sources. We've had questions regarding signage and information from the public and businesses. We're happy to refer those out to the CDC website for those. We don't have anything materials developed for that. But CDC has abundance of resources on their website that the community can defer and refer to them. Just so you know, we've been working with command staff and the Office of Emergency Management and, like I said, hospitals, EMS, to develop plans, and we have plans for monitoring possible cases, and that we do have one at some point within Victoria County. And we also can continue to develop and adapt plans because it's an ever-changing situation, as you know, from day to day. You've heard new information come out, new reports, so we're trying to evolve as quick as possible to address those needs as they arise. A couple things just want to kind of advise Did issue a press release last week that was pushed out to local media. Just a couple of important talking points on there I wanted to go over. Just keep in mind, for the general American public at this time, again, this could change very rapidly. The immediate health risk from COVID-19, novel coronavirus, is considered low. But again, that could change on a weekly or daily basis. What's important to know is the way it's transferred and transmitted, so that helps to learn how you can prevent from being exposed from that as well. Primarily between people who are in close contact with one another, so within 6 feet. And usually it's spread via respiratory droplets produced when you're coughing or sneezing, which in turn land in the mouths and noses and things. That's why we're encouraging hand washing, use of a hand sanitizer. Keep your hands away from your mouth. If you're sneezing or coughing, sneeze or cough in the sleeve, not in your hands, to help prevent that spread. Keep in mind there's no current vaccine. I know they've developed, but vaccine development takes a long time. So with this current situation, I don't know if it want to be available. So really the important part to remember is that it's up to the community and the public to help slow this spread and to stop it eventually. And that's just with, obviously those hygiene recommendations, washing your hands, avoid touching your face. If you're sick, stay home. If you know someone that's sick, avoid them, try to stay away from them. Clean, disinfect surfaces if you are ill. If there's places that are that's exposed to the public a lot, please keep in mind, clean, disinfect those surfaces around there as well. Again, the greatest asset really to slow this spread is going to be community effort. It's not anything that one of or two of us are going to do with plans. Is really community effort. Just same as flu precautions, help stop the spread of flu with those general guidelines that I discussed. For more information, again, CDC website, Center for Disease Control at cdc.gov, Department of State Health Services, and then also Victoria County Public Health Department website and Facebook. We'll continue to push out information as it becomes available, and we are available to answer any questions if you have them. I'll defer to Chief Fox and Rick. You have anything?
Good evening once again. Mr. Gonzalez summed the big picture up very well, but I kind of we wanted to address council and let you know what the city of Victoria and their staff are doing and preparation for the coronavirus. If Chief Craig doesn't mind, I'll speak for PD as well. Kind of what we've done so far, and we've been working on this for weeks. This just didn't happen the other day. Dispatch protocols have been adjusted and this is all about early screening. So we've already adjusted our dispatch protocols and screening techniques. We've also adjusted our patient interrogation questions. When we go to scene, we're actively trying to screen those patients out and identify them early. All first responders have reviewed our highly infectious disease policy. We do that training every year. The one good thing about the Ebola crisis was it prepared us for following crisis like this, so we're very well prepared. We're also evaluating our PPE. David mentioned that, kind of the crisis in San Antonio. Being a fire service, that was kind of beneficial even in the Ebola crisis. We have alternative respiratory protection measures, and we do have that here in Victoria. So we're going through inventorying our PPE and also identifying other sources that we could use if we are unable to obtain PPE. And lastly, as Mr. Gonzalez and Mr. McBriar will say, is that we're staying in constant contact and always updating our plans and evaluating the situation. I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding the city's actions.
I'll just briefly add to the city's actions
Yes,
that
sir.
we're also having conversations with HR from a risk management standpoint, just so that we're proactive and prepared to address any particular issue if there's an issue with an employee or somebody that visits one of our city facilities. And so that's something that we're proactively having meetings about as well, just so we at least don't go into it completely blindsided if something comes up. Rick, did you want to add anything, or David?
I think the only thing that needs to be added is that there is constant coordination with our hospital care facilities here in Victoria. We have a very unique group that meets on a regular basis, the Hospital Planning Group, the Healthcare Coalition, and they're all in check with each other. Those plans have been developed for years and are constantly looked at, and that group is a highly coordinated group. And so as information comes out from the epidemiologist and or from David's staff, we make sure it gets pushed down to them, and there's a two-way street of communications. And so That is an ongoing effort that we have on everything that we do, so. We'll be happy to answer any questions or.
I just want to add one more thing. We're anticipating possible cases in Texas. There's really nothing to prevent it right now. It's in the US, so that's what we're preparing for. Of course, I mean, currently, there's no confirmed cases in Victoria County. We can't report that, but definitely we're preparing for, I guess, cases in Texas at some point. So just want to add that.
And I'll also add too that one of the things that we're trying to be consistent with is referring everybody to the health department and to get their information from the health department. It's important that we're all on the same page with where the information is coming from. And in our particular case, it's from the health department. And so if somebody does ask any one of us, who do I need to follow to stay up to date? The answer is the health department. Any questions?
Thank you for your preparation and education.
All right.
I think we're in good hands.
All right, thank you all. Okay, so we'll go back to the first report. So I apologize, Danielle. And so this report will, of course, be given by our interim Parks Director, Danielle Williams.
Hello and good evening, council members and mayor. What I have here is like what was said. We have a preliminary design and we have two options that I'll be going over today. Right here on the first slide, you see an aerial view of the current duck pond, and then you see an example of what it may or could look like in the future. Just some background history real quick. It was closed in 2018 when we began to do some construction on the sidewalk because it was buckling and falling into the pond. And once we got in there and we drained the pond, we realized that there wasn't really much supporting that sidewalk underneath other than tree roots and water. So we saw that as a major concern, and we started seeking out design efforts to make it more structurally sound. So let's see here. Okay, so going over some of the main site issues, these are some pictures of after we drained it. There's definitely undermining of pond edge and sidewalk, sedimentation built up. Some of that is due from the flood after the hurricane. We had a lot of sediment settle over on the south side of the pond, which is near the gazebo area. And we also don't have a good circulation of water flow to help with any of that. So currently, we don't have defined maintenance best practices either. So even if and when it does flood, a lot of times what we would do is just come in and clean up the sidewalk and make the amenities clean for people to come back and access the duck pond. And also we have blending future improvements within context of the general use of the park. As we go forward, we'll go over some of those. And today, actually, I revisited the site, and walking in the pond where it's dry right there, it was very clear that you could see that there's nothing underneath that concrete curb but roots and sediment. And there was also on the island, the curb around it has sunk about 4 inches and has kind of pulled away from the island. Also, here's some more pictures. Now that sidewalk there is when we started doing the construction work, and we started pulling away some of the sidewalk there. But just to give y'all a better picture, if you haven't been able to go inside, it shows. Now, kind of over here to the top right, or my top right, yes, where you can see the feet, that is the sidewalk that goes to the gazebo. And that is what is preventing a lot of the drainage and circulation flow issues on that side of the pond. Oh, and going back real quick, where that little yellow stripe is on the concrete, just up there a little bit ways, there were some questions about a monument or a ornamental fountain that was dedicated to A.W. Armstrong Sr. It's still there. It's still existing. I don't know how functional it is, but it is still there. And we can salvage it and use it for future duck pond. All right, so this is design option 1. As you can see, we're staying consistent with the majority of having the sidewalk going around the perimeter of the smaller pond on the south side. We have the gazebo still on the island. We made that sidewalk leading to the island a straight shot instead of a zigzag of kind of how it is now, and that has box culverts underneath it. Around the perimeter, and on the next slide, I'll show you a little bit closer up view of it, but there are skimmers that are around the perimeter as well to help with some of that debris, because with trees comes a lot of foliage, a lot of leaves that fall in there, creates that sediment and build up on that south side of the pond. Then we have 2 aerators with LED lighting, those are fountains, and an optional floating fishing pier, and a ceremonial gazebo near the parking lot, what used to be the Riverside Pavilion area on the north side of the pond. So here's a closer up version of option 1. And you can see the skimmers a little bit better there. You can also see the kind of orangish brown horseshoe shaped sidewalk. That's actually a duck feeding area with a seated wall, with a wall that you can sit on and enjoy just the ambiance of the duck pond. That is something new. That is something that we don't currently have.
Can you go back
Sure.
one slide? That, one of the things that I've also heard is that historically there was also some paddle boats.
Yes.
And so I think this design facilitates that to come back at some point, right?
Yes, where the fishing pier is now is where we still have remnants of the old dock for the paddling boats. And there is a young lady in town that's been in communication with us who wants to hopefully bring that back out as an amenity for that larger side of the pond, which I think would be really nice later down in the future. So once again, we would improve the sidewalk around the perimeter. We're also in this option it's proposing this ready rock blocking system. You can see a small schematic of it at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. I do have that blown up on another slide, but that would be an effort to support the wall around the edge and also put a sidewalk so that you could walk around it. We'd also be renovating the fountain that is closer to the cart sheds that are at the top right corner of this picture.
Is the water level gonna be pretty much like that picture? Seem to remember it was pretty close to the sidewalks years ago when I took my children there.
I mean, ultimately, we would like for it to be probably more like that picture on the top.
Right.
I believe the picture on the bottom is more along a riverbank.
Yeah, I know that's not correct, but I just
Right.
wonder how much of that rock will actually show.
I
Can you
don't know for
control
sure.
the water level?
There is some controlling of that water because we use the water well to feed into that pond, and of course, the golf course uses that water to irrigate the golf course. So there is a little bit of control. Okay, so basically scope of work, kind of diving deeper into this is we keep the original design in the gazebo in the center aisle. We propose the box culverts, the trail connection between the 2 ponds, 4 skimmers proposed for maintenance. Now those would need to be, I was talking with staff today about that, and those would probably need to be checked on a daily basis to help keep the debris cleaned out. Because it's kind of the same concept as a pool, but a more commercial, industrial type skimmer. So that would need some more maintenance on our end as far as routine, checking those and cleaning those out. There's also proposed 4 direction subsurface jet blowers to help with the circulation, an aerator, which are those are the fountains, and the Ready Rock interlocking wall system to help support the wall. And you can see a picture of that here. And then we have the 5-foot concrete sidewalk. Okay, so here's the bigger blown up detail of how the Ready Rock wall is. It's kind of self-explanatory, but I don't really have a whole lot of experience with this Ready Rock wall, but it is to help with any prevent any erosion and support the bank.
I have a question. I'm really not trying to micromanage, but I know the cost is involved, and this is maybe the first time it hit me that you're talking about a 5-foot sidewalk. Is there that much use of the pond at a given point in time that we need that big of a sidewalk?
I just know personally, when I used to take my children there, it made it hard to pass on the existing sidewalk that we have. And also, I had worries about falling into the pond or my kids falling into the pond. I think if you have families with strollers, which I've seen out there, it helps to have the wider sidewalk so you can pass safely. Does that make sense?
I
Okay,
think
thank you.
TOS requirements are gonna have you have a 5-foot walk. Otherwise, there's
Correct.
limits of
Yeah.
passage. There's certain distances that you have to create a turnaround.
Yes.
And the 5-foot walk solves that to
Well,
make
then-
it handicap accessible.
While we're on that subject, is there a requirement that there be a sidewalk at all?
Well,
Mud.
if you wanted people to enjoy the pond,
And so, but is it required all the way around?
And
It's technically not, and that's why there's an option 2.
Right.
Right.
and is concrete the right product because of flooding?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
As opposed to a boardwalk, is concrete the right product?
Solid, you mean?
And because of flooding, is that why we've chosen concrete for the path?
I don't know, we could ask the
Yeah, we can find
designer
out more.
specifically.
So far, what's causing the problems with the concrete now is the support wall and the types of trees that are planted there. The cypress trees have these knobs, or
Knees.
whatever you want to
Knees.
call them, knees, knobs. And that's the main problem.
How does this Ready Rock wall not end up with the same issue of undercutting? So I'm assuming where we had that curb that has
Right.
no support underneath it, that at one time it rested on soil?
There are some old remnants of pillars, but underneath that, there's about, the curb is like this, and then underneath there's a series of pillars, but there's only about that much. And I even have a picture of one where it's just kind of hanging in the air. But I was literally just talking to Ken about this when I was showing him this, and he had the same concern that you do. So again, this is preliminary. This is what was provided to us by the landscape architect, not an engineer. Did you want to shed some?
No, I think you answered.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't know why.
it
I
has
mean,
to do
I'm
with
guessing that the river, when it's flooded and flowing across there, undercuts
It does.
whatever's there, and
Right.
I just don't know what,
It's
This
gonna
is gonna
depend
do
on the
this different.
depth of that, Jeff,
but
because
it, yeah, in that buried depth,
where
right?
it
in
says
this-
the buried depth, that's the key right there.
Yeah,
That's
so
gotta
it may not
determined.
be 5 blocks or 6
Right.
blocks like it's
Yeah,
shown, it might
because
be,
the buried depth is what they're gonna have to calculate to make sure you get below that area where that current can undermine it.
Correct.
And then they have the drainage in the back of it to relieve pressure, to want to push it over. So that drain, if they do drain that, it'll be into a sump or something to get it out, but I think that's the key to it, is the engineering determine that buried depth, the bottom of that wall.
yeah, so it's not just that. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not even a full course
No.
on that buried depth.
Right.
Okay. And it's typical that engineering document's not quite done.
It's a schematic design. Schematic design.
All right.
All right, move on, okay. All right, so this is for the design option 1 cost. I know in the packet I presented a more detailed line item, but this is a high-level view of what the breakdown in cost is. And so we're looking at the 1.5 million for option 1.
What is general conditions?
That's a good question.
I think it was in the,
Mr. Mayor will
Further
know this
breakdown.
very well.
Those are things like your insurance, your supervision.
Mobilization, Ken
It's
says.
things that it costs toward a project that really don't go into the project.
And that you don't
It's
see.
all the, it's the bonds and insurance, bonds.
Soft
and
costs.
Soft costs and things like that. The things that make a project done by government entities more expensive than private entities in many instances. But much of it's required by law, so.
Ready? Okay. So now here's the scope 2, or option 2. We propose one major pond that eliminates the island and also the mini wall, if you will, that crosses over to the other side. And it eliminates the restrictions that promoted with silting and sediment buildup, removes island gazebo, reduces sidewalk. So going back to what you said, Mrs. Scott, we only have the sidewalk on the one side. And like on option 1, the sidewalk also extends over to that parking lot on the north side of the pond. And there's only 3 skimmers, still have the 2 aerators or the fountains, 5-foot concrete sidewalk, and again, the fishing pier or the ceremonial gazebo. Something a little unique about the ceremonial gazebo is you see it kind of sits over the water, and that's exactly how I envisioned it when we were working with the landscape architect. It would kind of be out over the water.
So with that fishing dock location, are we gonna put any fads there?
Put any, what?
Fishing attractant devices,
Oh,
underwater structures so that they. Mr. Leasack would understand what that is. But I mean, if
He's
we're gonna,
speaking Daryl.
if we're gonna put something there, I mean,
Yeah.
I think it'd be a good idea to have something that actually attracts fish in that area and it makes it more pleasurable to fish off that dock.
I can make note of that. We
We'll
can
make
also
sure
put
we'll include Daryl in the,
fish food.
in the project.
Along those lines, though, what's the distance? Because I'm envisioning a ceremony with pictures on that gazebo and people on the fishing dock at the same time.
Did not think about that.
Of course, fishing out there, when you're doing paddle boats, nobody likes to get a hook in their mouth when they're
Right.
paddle boating either.
Yeah,
We,
that's true.
in the small pond, there was a lot of, I would say, fishing, angling trash when we emptied it. So lots of hooks, lots of bobbers, lots of nets, lots of kind of trash over there. And I can't help but think that's a lot, has to do with the trees. As a fisherman lady, I would not want to fish on that side because of the trees. But being on the dock, I don't have to worry about getting hung up as I'm casting backwards. But
I never knew anybody fished on that pond.
Didn't we used to have some stock fishing for youth out
I
there?
think
Yes.
we used to put
Oh,
some
it was
in
there.
there.
I
Yes.
thought that it was in Tracy Park.
we've
I think it
we've
used to be
moved it
done
out
down
there.
here in the duck pond.
Both.
Yes, the Lions Club put on an event every October, and we help with them out there at Ethel Tracy. And before then, we used to have it here. And I know VISD has also had some angling events out there as well.
Is that the ideal place for a fishing dock with a gazebo there in this model?
It can be moved.
I mean, in this option, since we're getting rid of the island, you could easily put that gazebo on the other side.
Correct.
Right.
Would the island slash the pathway across there be the most likely place to break down with the recurrent flooding that we have? Do you see that as the most problematic spot? I would just think a strip of land running across 2 ponds with constant water on both sides probably has a greater chance for breakdown.
True.
Sounds like
I
see your point.
I like
I'm leaning
this
towards
option.
option 2.
I really like
Okay.
this option. The only
Okay.
thing I would like to see is maybe another pathway to a floating dock. So if you needed to move the dock, maybe you could move it to the smaller pond area. Since it's a floating dock,
Yeah, I would move the dock, not the
so why couldn't you
gazebo.
have a couple, multiple locations where you might move it at a couple of times?
Okay.
But I don't know how it anchors, so.
Yeah, and I don't know if you just heard, but
would move-
Councilman Scott suggested,
Yeah, I wouldn't move the gazebo because you've got the parking lot there and all those things. I would move the dock, and I like your suggestion.
Just have some multiple locations where it could be anchored, maybe?
or we could look at having two, with one focused on fishing and one focused on the paddle boats,
Yes.
and keep them in different, at least originating in different parts.
I wanna
And then
fish
just
and
put a sign
paddle.
that says, watch for the hook, or something.
No paddle boats in this area or no fishing
Yeah,
in
I
this
mean,
area.
you know, we could always think of ways to say, you know, no paddling beyond this point, you
Right.
know, and kind of keep those two separate.
Swim lane buoys.
Swim lane, that's what I was thinking.
They exist.
How natural.
Yeah,
Let's keep it fun.
yeah, that's right.
If you're looking for a consensus, you know, I'm going for design option 2.
I am
on
as
it.
well.
I like to.
Okay, well, we got to the last slide, I guess,
Yeah,
so
Oh, you got one more slide?
I had a few more.
run through it, please. Just real-
Anyway, this is the comparison of the two options. You know, the first one's 1.5, the second one's 1.2, and you have the cost difference down there. Funding options, this is a new slide that wasn't provided. These are possible funding options that we could look at for funding this project. One being Parks Projects funds. The only downfall to that is that it would consume 100% of what's been allocated. And then,
And those are the funds, as a reminder, those are the funds we recently allocated from the
Yes.
TxDOT overpass funds, that we set a pot of money aside for parks projects. That's what that is referring to.
Yes. And then number 2, there is a local parks 50-50 matching grant with Texas Parks and Wildlife that we could look at. Then number 3, capital improvement projects. Now again, in history, the Parks Department has typically only received $500,000 to $600,000 annually for our capital improvement projects, except for the one time that we built the new office space. So I don't know what that would look like later down the road, if this would be the one and only project for our capital improvement, or one and some, or however the pieces fall on that one. And then number 4, working with local foundations. We could look at working with local foundations will help supporting funding this project, or we could do a combination with CIP, grants. You know, we could do a combination of any of these. And then here's my last slide. Out of the 2, everybody seems like option 2 is the most favorite design.
Nobody else has said anything,
No?
but
In your itemized one, you have 4 skimmers for both options.
Okay.
I'm just letting you know.
Okay.
That'll
thank you
knock
for
off.
being
Thank
so
you.
thorough.
That'll knock off about 1,500 or whatever on the second option. You're welcome.
But yeah,
Funding options wise, if that's the second question, is
Yes.
I'd like us to look at Texas Parks and Wildlife grants.
Okay.
And then I wouldn't like to use all our funds allocated for parks on this one project
agreed.
without looking at an entire list of what is available to spend the money on to improve parks across the city.
Okay.
Would you go back to the picture of option 2? And is the land beyond that already in use in various ways? Like, does that border on the zoo? Does it border on the golf course? Or
This
there-
is right next to the golf course. You see the building structures to the right? Those are the cart sheds.
Okay,
The side, what looks like a sidewalk on the top is actually the cart path.
cart path, that's what I thought.
And then we have the pump house for the well on the top left. And then this parking lot, we actually do have a shade structure over that big rectangle concrete slab.
And then
Thank you.
what's beyond that?
To the left is more golf course,
Okay,
and then it turns into Grover's Bend, and then you're going back up, back to the old office.
okay, thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Is it
The only-
possible?
oh, I'm sorry.
Is it possible to find out grant funding prior to moving forward with the project? Or, and I guess somebody said, obvious question, do we like option 2 because of the money, or do we like it because of the design?
I like the design. I like the large pond. I like what Dr. Young pointed out on the flooding and downstream pressure, or the flooding pressure on a dividing wall.
I have a question on the wall. the wall with that rock that was shown earlier, does it go all, it doesn't go all the way around, does it? It's only in certain parts of it, correct?
That's what the pictures indicated, just parts.
That would be a question for Brent.
Keep going
I'm
back.
assuming that it would go around just like it has it up there in the top left-hand corner picture.
And it may have been on option one, but I noticed there were places that it said that it had the wall and other places
It's not
it
listed in
didn't.
the scope of work that he provided on option 2. So,
Shorter. The wall is shorter on option 2.
yeah.
You can see it says linear foot, it's 600, I can't read that good.
Right.
Right, and that's why I asked,
Yes.
the question, because that leads me to believe, and I should have noticed this earlier when you showed this to me, but, it makes me think that then the only place where they're envisioning putting the wall is on the side where the sidewalk is on,
Right.
Right.
Could be because that's the only
think-
place in contact with the water.
but I don't know.
It's not just the darker brown that gets it?
No,
No.
Okay.
no, that orangey color is where it would be a seat wall.
Seat wall.
So is it perhaps that the rest of this
And
is
we'll
not
find out
right
for
on-
sure.
Yes,
right on
I will
the
definitely
water?
ask him if that was his intentions or not to
here.
have that ready rock wall around the perimeter.
And at the end of that wall, you have to have erosion from the back.
Yeah, that's not a color I recognize.
All right.
In any case, so with the direction of, of going with option 2, we'll certainly now focus on getting some grants or what I'm hearing is, maybe even working with some local foundations is an option, but ultimately spending all of the money in the Parks Fund is probably not wise, and we would agree with that. And so we'll continue to work at it and then develop a more specific plan and then come back to council with those details. I do want to also briefly add too, that for the benefit of the public that might be watching or tuning in, or even in the public, if there's somebody from the public out there, is that this is also the area where we had that erosion issue.
Yes.
And so I don't know if maybe you can hover over with the mouse on where that area is. But that's a big reason why we've chose to come before you today. I know that out in the community, there have been a lot of questions asked as to, what's the city doing related to the duck pond? But I think it's important to note that from a safety standpoint, we didn't feel it was appropriate to proceed with having this discussion about improving the duck pond until we had a good sense of the timing behind the erosion control aspect of it, which is right across the way. And you may recall that that came to council last month. And so I don't know if you have an update on the timeline for that.
Yes, the update on the erosion project, we're having a pre-construction Monday with the contractor, and they're securing materials and they're ready to get started. So I expect that project to get kicked off in the next week or two.
Thank you.
I might add, this is very timely. I actually was contacted via an email by someone who visited our park last weekend, and were asking if what's going to happen with the duck pond because they remembered it. So you guys really made me look like a hero when I was able to tell them it's going to be on the agenda tonight. So people are concerned, and I think it's a good thing if we can move forward with it.
This is just kind of off the cuff. That repair that we're gonna do on the bank, are we confident enough to say that that road doesn't need to move towards the duck pond where it needs to be reshaped at this point, since before we go ahead with any major
I'll let
renovation
Ken
of that?
address that.
Yes, it's going to be, if the road's going to stay the same, we're going to shift the sidewalk over a little bit from where it currently exists, but the road is in good shape. We're going to slope back the bank a little bit more.
And I believe we actually anticipate bringing those or some of those parking spaces back.
Okay.
That currently are blocked off with a fence.
Right.
Some of those will come back.
Just because now would be the time if we had to move that side of the duck pond.
Right, yeah, true.
When is the erosion project supposed to finish?
They have 90 days. They're going to do everything in their power to finish both the river project at the pump station and then at the park. Their goal is to get in and get out.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we do have a report by our police department, and I'll let Chief Craig introduce our keynote speaker.
Keynote speaker. Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. The next item for consideration is a new police department program, Data-Driven Approaches to Crime and Traffic Safety. I'd like to introduce Deputy Chief Mark Jamison, who's the department point on this, and he'll be delivering the presentation.
Well, good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. See if we can get situated here. Tonight, I wanted to talk to you or bring before you a program that we were looking at implementing in April. And it's called DDAX, as the chief made reference to, and it's Data-Driven Approach to Crime and Traffic Safety. All right, so what is DDAX? DDAX is a law enforcement operation model that integrates location-based and traffic crash data to determine the most effective way to deploy our law enforcement resources. This is a philosophy that is very compatible with existing policies, models that you may be familiar with, the community-oriented policing, problem-oriented policing, or intelligence-led policing. One of the reasons that we're wanting to come and talk to you about it is because the cornerstone to a successful DDAX program is a high visibility of traffic enforcement in a particular area that's designated. So what that means is we're going to be sending a lot of officers that are going to be working traffic in those areas. What the thought is, in the theory, based on the DDAX model, is that you will reduce not only crime, but you will also reduce your crashes in that area. And obviously, that's one of the reasons that we wanted to come and talk to you, is because your support is vital. Obviously, if officers are going to be in those areas, you may receive some phone calls from your constituents that would be asking why that's going on, and we wanted to talk to you first before we roll out the program to the public. What that stems from is that there is some statistics that show when an officer is working in an area, the likelihood of crime occurring for the next 45 minutes is very low. So if you have a highly visible, if we take a highly visible approach to that area, common sense would tell you that crime's going to go down in that area. So keep that in mind as we go through the process or the program or the presentation. I can tell you that this isn't something, has started across the country. Hundreds of agencies are doing it across the country. In Texas specifically, there are 7 that consist of Corpus Christi, Pearland, Longview, Harlingen, Weslaco, and Cleburne. So the goal behind it is a starting point for a long-term change. Oftentimes, we have been reactive. If crime is occurring, we'll send our resources there based on short-term information. This is where we're looking at, we're going to take a more evidence and victim-based approach to deploy our personnel. And the goal in this is please understand, is not to write more tickets. That's not what we're looking for. Our objective is to reduce crime and crashes in those areas. And then through monitoring and constantly evaluating and doing an analysis on the information, it'll provide data-driven feedback as to what adjustments we need to make to the plan. The principle in itself is not a new principle, but what is new is that we are going to focus on historical data opposed to what's happening any given month. And you're aware that over the last couple of years, we've added a data analyst to our staff that has been providing, statistical information on Facebook and things of that nature. And we've focused a lot on month and how it compares to our 5-year data, but we haven't really adjusted our operation model or how we're deploying our resources just yet. So this supports that. And we have been reactive for quite some time, and now we want to be proactive as much as we can. So why DDAX? DDAX focuses on crime and crash data that often occur in close proximity. You all know what the social harms are of a crash, you know, injuries and things of that nature. But crashes also, you may not be aware of, are a significant drain on our resources. And we'll get into some of how many crashes we've had and the man hours that we spent on those crashes in the following slides. But there's also, as you were aware from the chief's presentation at the last city council meeting where he delivered the annual crime numbers, we were up in certain areas, violent crime, and this will help us to work to bring those numbers down. And we also noticed that other cities that have implemented the DDAX model, and I mentioned earlier Harlingen was one of them. I can tell you that Harlingen witnessed a 40% reduction in their calls for service. They almost cut the amount of calls that they receive in half because they implemented this deal. They also saw a 63% reduction in violent crimes and a 54% reduction in property crimes. Cleburne is another city that we mentioned. They saw a 33% reduction in Class 1 crimes. Those are statistics that we would really like to have in Victoria. So how does it work? We identify areas within our city that have, and this is all based on 5-year data. It's not something that's just happening last month or within the last year. This is based on 5 years of historical data. We identify those areas and then we saturate those areas with additional personnel. Now, there may be a concern that we're gonna rob Peter to pay Paul, and that's not the case here. We're gonna supplement, think of this as a supplemental deal where we're gonna take officers, we're gonna reallocate detectives, members of support services, administrative staff, the chief and myself and other command staff going out and working in these particular areas with the hope that we're gonna bring the crime and the number of crashes down. The city is broken up into 5 zones. Each office or each zone typically has 2 to 3 officers assigned to that. And how that's broken up is based on the calls that we take, and we adjust those zones from time to time, is to try to level it out across that each zone has the right amount of officers in it. None of that is going to change with these DDACs because we're bringing in supplemental personnel to address that. And there's no extra cost. We're going to be using people that would already be working. So there's no more man hours that will be spent. It's not going to cost us any more money to implement this program. Something else that's important is we will work with the community partners in those areas to deal with it. And I want to stress again that we're not taking existing officers from other zones to work in these areas. In addition, we will conduct media campaigns to educate the public. We'll also work with our city partners like code enforcement and things like that to address issues that may arise. Our community engagement unit will hold information sharing meetings, and you'll see some of that stuff happening in this month, during this month, because we want to roll this out in early April. So we already are starting to set up community meetings where we can educate the areas, the people that are going to be affected by that. And remember, the goal is to reduce the number of crashes and the crime in those areas. So I want to give you an idea of what crashes look like and crimes in the state of Texas. As you can see, aggravated assaults happen every 8 minutes. Violent crimes occur every 5 minutes. And crashes are reported about every 61 seconds. I can tell you across the state that crime and crashes have gone up in 2019. Of course, we don't have the official numbers yet, but all indicators are pointing that direction. We already know that some of our violent crimes went up. We had an increase in that. On a positive note, I can say that the number of crashes that we had were down from the year before. But if we can work the combination of the two, we're hoping to bring them all down. So let's look at some statistical data to show you how expensive or how much crashes cost us in Victoria. We had 2,029 crashes reported in 2018. 4,523 officers were dispatched to those crashes. And we had 2,953 man-hours spent working those crashes. You can see that that equates to almost 2 full-time positions within the police department. And that does not factor in the amount of funds that are being spent on the fire apparatuses that are responding, and also the risk of danger to the citizens and the personnel that are working those accidents. So what do? Because of that, we implement this model, and what it does is some of you may be familiar with the hotspots. You've seen some of the presentations that have been done on Facebook where you see the yellow and the orange and the red. Okay, those are hotspots. Those are class 1 crime hotspots. So what we'll do is we're going to take those spots and then we're going to overlay 5-year statistical data on crashes, and it's going to tell us where our DDAC zone should be. Basically, we're going to let the data tell us where we should put our officers. So what does that look like? If you look at this map, the circles represent crashes, and it's the model that we put in is based on 20 crashes. And then the red, orange, and yellow, the darker the red, the more crime that you have, more cluster of crimes that you have together. And again, we're only talking about class 1 crimes here. The bold lines represent the borders for the individual zones, and then the 3 DDAC zones that we have identified is what you see outlined in red. Those DDAC zones have been identified as 1, 2, and 3. The borders, these are the streets that border the zones. So DDAC Zone 1 would be Pine Street and Laurent to Colorado and Ben Jordan. DDAC 2 would be Red River between Laurent and Navarro, north to Loma Vista. And DDAC Zone 3 would be Crestwood between Laurent and Ben Jordan, north to Polk and Sam Houston. And I can't stress enough that this is 5 years of data. This isn't, and it's all evidence-based and location-based. It's a non-biased approach. So in closing, with the assistance of our crime analysts, we'll be able to track. We're going to evaluate this on a 6-month basis and see if it's having the desired effect that we want, and we'll be able to make adjustments as need be. And the belief is that by targeting high crash spots that are within the high crime areas and with highly visible traffic enforcement, we're going to see a reduction in both those deals. And I'm willing to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. It was a great presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, those statistics on decrease in crimes from Harlingen and Cleburne are
Very impressive,
amazing.
aren't they? Yes, sir.
I want to briefly just add too that we also recognize that at the end of the day, this is just one component of creating a more sustainable neighborhood or community. And so simultaneous to this, there are also efforts and conversations taking place on how we can look at, code enforcement was mentioned earlier, but we'll be looking at street lighting. If there happens to be a park in one of these areas, what are we doing to enhance the visibility in that park? So there are multiple facets behind this concept that are also working on the back end. And we'll probably talk about some of those as we go through the budget process, since some of those might necessitate resources as we sort of expand our focus on creating more resilient neighborhoods. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, Mr. Gisher, will you take us into executive session?
Sure, the city council will recess now for executive session on the 3rd day of March 2020 at 6:19 PM. The subject matter of the executive session deliberations is as follows. Texas Government Code Section 551.072 to deliberate the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property interests due to the fact that a deliberation in an open meeting would have a detrimental effect on the position of the city in negotiations with a third party. And second, executive session in accordance with Texas Government Code Section 551.087 to discuss or deliberate the offer of financial or other incentive to a business prospect that the city council seeks to have locate, stay, or expand in or near the territory of the city of Victoria, and with which the city is conducting economic development negotiations. Thank you.
And there will be no action taken after the executive session, so we will not return to the council chambers.
Where are we going? Upstairs, I think. What bar area?
Let's ask Jesus.
Yes.
We have other